The first rays of sunlight crept over the hilltops, illuminating the dew-laden grass where Sophia Hayes stood staring at the dilapidated structure before her. At 22 years of age, she had already endured more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. Her honey-blonde hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, framing a face that villagers often described as hauntingly beautiful despite the shadows of grief that lingered in her deep blue eyes. "This cannot be all that remains," she whispered, clutching the parchment that had summoned her to this remote corner of the countryside. The letter had arrived 3 weeks after she had buried her husband, taken by the same fever that had claimed her parents only months before. Her threadbare dress hung loosely on her slender frame, the neckline worn low from repeated mending, inadvertently revealing the graceful curve of her collarbone. Though poverty had left its mark on her possessions, it had failed to diminish the natural elegance with which she carried herself. Beside her, her son Thomas, barely 5 years old, clung to her skirts while staring wide-eyed at the crumbling farmhouse. The roof had partially collapsed on one side, and ivy crawled across the stone walls as if nature itself was reclaiming the structure. "Mother, is this our home now?" Thomas asked, his small voice carrying across the overgrown yard. Sophia swallowed hard. "Yes, my love. Your great-uncle Bartholomew has left us this place." Though she had never met the man, the solicitor had been clear. Her mother's eccentric uncle had specifically named Sophia in his will, leaving her this property that sat at the edge of the forest, far from the village. A sudden bark startled them both. From behind the house emerged a shaggy gray hound, thin but alert. The dog approached cautiously, sniffing at Thomas, who giggled and reached out his hand. "Careful," Sophia warned, but the dog merely licked the boy's fingers before sitting at their feet, looking up expectantly. "I shall call him Faithful," Thomas declared with a certainty only a child could muster. Sophia managed a smile. "It seems we have inherited a guardian as well." With resigned determination, she pushed open the crooked door and stepped into what would now be their home. Inside was worse than she had feared. Dust covered everything, cobwebs stretched across the beams, and the floor was littered with broken furniture and moldering books. "We will make this right," she said more to herself than to Thomas. "We have nowhere else to go." That first night, they huddled together on a relatively clean corner of the floor, Faithful curled protectively around Thomas. Sophia stared into the darkness of the ceiling beams, wondering what strange twist of fate had brought her to inherit this worthless hovel from a relative she had never known. As dawn broke, she began the monumental task of cleaning. She found a broom with half its bristles missing and swept years of dust from the wooden floors. Thomas trailed behind her, helping in his small way, while Faithful patrolled the perimeter of the property. By midday, Sophia had cleared enough space in the main room to see what they were truly working with. The structure was sounder than it initially appeared. The roof leak was contained to one corner, and most of the furniture, though worn, could be salvaged. "Mother, look what I found," Thomas called, holding up a tarnished silver candlestick from beneath a pile of rags. "Careful with that," Sophia said, taking it from him. The weight of it surprised her, real silver and finely crafted. She turned it over, noting an unfamiliar crest engraved on the bottom. "This is quite valuable," she murmured, wondering why such a treasure had been discarded among garbage. Over the next several days, Sophia worked from dawn until dusk. She mended the roof with salvaged thatch from the attached barn, scrubbed the floors until her hands were raw, and repaired what furniture she could. Thomas helped by carrying small items and keeping Faithful from underfoot. The dog, however, had developed a strange habit. Every afternoon, he would scratch persistently at a specific spot on the floor near the hearth, whining until Thomas joined him. "Mother, Faithful wants to show us something," Thomas insisted on the 5th day, as Sophia was hanging herbs to dry from the newly cleaned ceiling beams. Not now, Thomas. I am trying to make this place livable before winter comes. But the boy's persistence matched the dog's, and finally, Sophia relented, kneeling beside the spot where Faithful continued to scratch. The floorboard there seemed no different from the others, though perhaps it was a shade darker. When she pressed her hand against it, she felt a slight give that the surrounding boards lacked. "Bring me that knife from the table," she instructed Thomas, curiosity finally overcoming her exhaustion. With a knife's edge, she pried at the board until it lifted, revealing a small space beneath. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked with age, but the pages intact. "What is it, Mother?" Thomas asked, peering over her shoulder. "I believe it belonged to your great-uncle," Sophia replied, opening the cover to find spidery handwriting filling the yellowed pages. "It appears to be his journal." That night, after Thomas had fallen asleep, Sophia sat by the light of a single candle and began to read. The journal contained the ramblings of an educated man who had chosen solitude over society. Bartholomew Hayes had apparently been a physician in London before some scandal had driven him to this remote property. His entries spoke of experiments, rare herbs gathered from the forest, and increasingly of a discovery that had consumed his later years. Several pages had been torn out, and others contained drawings of the property with peculiar markings. One passage in particular caught her attention. "They believe I have nothing of value, which is precisely why I am safe here. What lies beneath is worth more than any man's fortune, yet its true worth is not in gold, but in justice long delayed." Sophia closed the journal, her mind racing. What could be hidden on this seemingly worthless property? And who were they that Bartholomew feared? Her questions would soon find answers, for the very next morning, a visitor arrived. Sophia was in the garden, attempting to clear the overgrown vegetables, when she heard the approach of horses. Looking up, she saw a well-dressed man dismounting from an impressive black stallion. His clothing marked him as a person of considerable means, and his bearing suggested authority. "Good day," he called, removing his hat to reveal silver-streaked dark hair. "I am Edward Covington, steward to Lord Blackmore. I was passing and noticed activity at this long-abandoned property." Sophia wiped her soil-covered hands on her apron, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance beside this immaculate gentleman. Her worn dress, once blue but now faded to an indeterminate color, clung to her figure as she straightened. "Sophia Hayes," she replied with as much dignity as she could muster. "This property was left to me by my great-uncle, Bartholomew Hayes." Something flickered in Edward's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or calculation. "Bartholomew Hayes? The old hermit? I was not aware he had any family." "Neither was I, until I received word of his passing and my inheritance." Sophia gestured to the farmhouse, which still looked pitiful despite her efforts. "Not much of a legacy, as you can see." Edward's gaze traveled over the property with an intensity that made Sophia uncomfortable. "On the contrary, Mistress Hayes, this land borders Lord Blackmore's hunting grounds. His lordship has expressed interest in acquiring it many times." "It is not for sale," Sophia replied automatically, surprised by her own vehemence. A smile that did not reach his eyes crossed Edward's face. "Of course. I merely thought you might wish to know that should you ever reconsider, Lord Blackmore would offer a fair price. This is hardly a fitting place for a young woman and—" He paused as Thomas emerged from the house with Faithful at his heels. "A child." Thomas ran to his mother's side, staring up at the stranger with undisguised curiosity. "This is my son, Thomas," Sophia said, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "And we are managing quite well. Thank you." Edward bowed slightly. "Then I shall leave you to your labors. Good day, Mistress Hayes. Young Master Hayes." He turned to leave, but paused. One small matter of neighborly advice. The local folk believe this place to be cursed. Your great-uncle was not well-liked or understood. You may find the villagers unwelcoming." With that unsettling warning, he mounted his horse and rode away, but not before casting one last searching look at the property. "I do not like that man," Thomas announced after Edward had disappeared down the rutted path. Sophia knelt beside her son. "We must be careful around him, Thomas. I do not believe his visit was merely a coincidence." That night, after Thomas was asleep, Sophia returned to Bartholomew's journal. The more she read, the more convinced she became that her great-uncle had been hiding something of immense value. References to the pond's secret appeared repeatedly in the later entries, along with cryptic notations about moon phases and water levels. The pond in question lay behind the house, a small, murky body of water choked with reeds and lily pads that Sophia had dismissed as another worthless part of her inheritance. Now, she wondered what secrets it might hold. Dawn found her standing at its edge, studying the still water with new interest. Faithful joined her, whining softly and pacing along the muddy bank. "What is it, boy? Is there something here?" she asked, watching as the dog sniffed intensely at a particular spot. Over the next week, Sophia divided her time between restoring the farmhouse and investigating the mysteries of her inheritance. She discovered a hidden compartment in Bartholomew's bedchamber containing vials of dried herbs and minerals, along with notes describing their medicinal properties. Her great-uncle had indeed been a skilled physician, and his knowledge might prove valuable. The village proved as unwelcoming as Edward had suggested. When Sophia ventured there to trade some of Bartholomew's silver for supplies, she was met with suspicious glances and whispered conversations that ceased when she approached. Only the blacksmith's wife, Martha, showed her any kindness, pulling her aside as she was leaving the market. "You are living in the old healer's house," Martha stated, her weathered face creased with concern. "Yes, he was my great-uncle," Sophia confirmed. Martha glanced around nervously before continuing in a hushed voice. "There are stories about that place. About why the old lord's men came in the night, years ago. About why Bartholomew never left afterward." "What stories?" Sophia asked, her heart quickening. "They say he knew things about the old lord, Lord Blackmore's father. Terrible things. And that he had proof hidden somewhere on that property." Martha pressed a small loaf of bread into Sophia's hands. "Take care, child. The current Lord Blackmore is cut from the same cloth as his father." Sophia returned home with Martha's warning echoing in her mind. That night, another storm lashed the countryside, and Sophia was awakened by Thomas's excited voice. "Mother, mother, the pond is glowing." Startled from sleep, Sophia followed her son to the window. Through the curtain of rain, she could see a faint, eerie blue light emanating from the pond's surface. By morning, the strange phenomenon had vanished, but Faithful's behavior became even more peculiar. The dog spent hours at the pond's edge, occasionally diving into the water as if searching for something, then emerging to shake himself vigorously before diving again. "I think he's trying to show us something," Thomas insisted as they watched the dog's antics. "Perhaps," Sophia agreed, remembering Bartholomew's journal entries about the pond's secret. That afternoon, Thomas came running into the house, soaking wet and clutching something in his small fist. "Look what Faithful found," he exclaimed, opening his hand to reveal a tarnished metal object. Sophia gasped. It was a signet ring, heavy and ornate, bearing a coat of arms she recognized from her visits to the village, the crest of the Blackmore family. "Where exactly did you find this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Thomas pointed toward the pond. Faithful was digging at the bottom. "There's something big down there, Mother, but I could not lift it." Heart-pounding, Sophia followed her son to the pond. The water was too murky to see clearly, but when she reached in where Thomas indicated, her fingers brushed against something solid and metallic. With determination, she rolled up her sleeves and plunged both arms into the cold water, grasping what felt like a handle. With Thomas's help, she pulled, revealing a small chest, its metal clasp corroded but intact. They dragged it to the bank, where Sophia used a stone to break the lock. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them remarkably well, were documents bearing the Blackmore seal and a smaller box containing jewels that glittered even through decades of tarnish. "Treasure!" Thomas exclaimed, his eyes wide. But Sophia's attention was fixed on the documents. As she read through them, her hands began to shake. They were letters, confessions from the old Lord Blackmore admitting to crimes of extortion, theft, and even murder. Among them was a deed showing that the lands currently held by the Blackmore estate had been unlawfully seized from their rightful owners during the last plague outbreak. "This is what Bartholomew meant by justice," Sophia whispered. A sound behind them made her turn sharply. Edward Covington stood at the edge of the clearing, his face a mask of cold fury. "I suspected the old fool had hidden evidence," he said, stepping forward. "Lord Blackmore will be most interested to learn what you have discovered." Sophia pushed Thomas behind her, clutching the documents. "These prove that your lord's family stole their wealth and position. They belong to the families who were wronged." Edward's laugh held no humor. "And who would believe a destitute widow over one of the most powerful men in the county? Be sensible, Mistress Hayes. Turn over those papers, and Lord Blackmore might still make you a generous offer for this land." Faithful growled, placing himself between Sophia and Edward. The steward's hand moved to the dagger at his belt. "I would reconsider that action, Covington," came a new voice. From the trees emerged a tall man in the uniform of the King's Magistrate, accompanied by 2 armed guards. "Those documents have been sought for many years." "Magistrate Ellis," Edward stuttered, his hand falling from his weapon. "This is a private matter between Lord Blackmore and this woman." "Not anymore," the magistrate replied firmly. "We have been investigating Lord Blackmore's affairs for some time, and your presence here confirms our suspicions." He turned to Sophia. "I am Magistrate Ellis. A local woman, Martha, I believe, sent word that you might have evidence of the Blackmore family's crimes." Relief flooded through Sophia. "These papers prove that the current Lord Blackmore's father seized lands unlawfully and silenced those who opposed him." As the guards took Edward into custody, Magistrate Ellis examined the documents with growing astonishment. "This is more than enough to bring charges against Lord Blackmore. The families who lost their lands during the plague years may finally see justice." In the days that followed, the countryside was abuzz with the scandal. Lord Blackmore was arrested, his ill-gotten assets seized by the Crown. The magistrate ensured that Sophia received a substantial reward for providing the evidence, along with legal confirmation of her ownership of Bartholomew's property. With her newfound resources, Sophia transformed the crumbling farmhouse into a comfortable home. She discovered that Bartholomew had been more than just a hermit physician. He had been keeper of secrets that could topple the corrupt and powerful. His medicinal notes proved valuable as well, and Sophia began to study them, gradually earning a reputation as a skilled healer like her great-uncle. The pond yielded more treasures, coins, jewelry, and documents that Bartholomew had hidden from the Blackmore family. Sophia ensured that heirlooms were returned to their rightful owners when possible, earning the respect and friendship of the villagers who had once shunned her. 1 year after her arrival, the farmhouse stood transformed. Fresh thatch covered the roof, the walls were whitewashed, and the garden flourished with herbs and vegetables. Inside, polished wooden floors gleamed in the sunlight that streamed through clean windows. Thomas had grown stronger and happier, dividing his time between helping his mother and attending lessons with the village schoolmaster. As Sophia stood in the doorway watching Thomas play with Faithful in the yard, Magistrate Ellis approached on horseback. He had become a frequent visitor, offering guidance on legal matters and, increasingly, companionship that Sophia found herself welcoming. "The house looks remarkable," he commented, dismounting. "You have worked miracles here." Sophia smiled, no longer the desperate widow in threadbare clothing. Her new dress, a deep blue that matched her eyes, was simple but well-made, and the confidence with which she carried herself spoke of inner strength rather than mere survival. "Not miracles," she replied. "Just persistence and a willingness to look beneath the surface." She gazed out at the pond, now cleared of overgrowth and reflecting the blue sky above. "My great-uncle understood that true value is not always visible to those who judge by appearances alone." "A lesson Lord Blackmore learned too late," Ellis agreed. "The families reclaiming their lands send their gratitude. You have changed many lives, Mistress Hayes." "As mine was changed by an inheritance that seemed worthless," Sophia said softly. She thought of the journal she had found that first week, now carefully preserved in her small library. Bartholomew's final entry had read, "To whoever finds these words after I am gone, look closely at what others dismiss. Therein lies both fortune and redemption." Thomas ran up to them, faithful bounding at his heels. "Magistrate Ellis, have you come to stay for supper? Mother has made her special stew." Ellis smiled at the boy, then looked questioningly at Sophia. "If your mother permits, I would be honored." "We would be pleased to have you," Sophia replied, her cheeks warming slightly under his gaze. As they walked together toward the house that had once seemed a worthless inheritance, but now stood as a testament to resilience and hope, Sophia felt a sense of peace settle over her. From tragedy had come not just survival but triumph. The crumbling farmhouse that had once represented the end of her hopes had become the foundation of a new beginning, for herself, for Thomas, and perhaps, as Ellis's hand briefly touched hers, for a future she had once thought lost forever. Behind them, the pond glimmered in the late afternoon sun, its secrets revealed but its beauty only enhanced by the knowledge of what had lain hidden beneath its placid surface, much like the strength that had always existed within Sophia herself, waiting for the right moment to emerge.